Hope you're doing well today. It is October 26th. We are going to be looking in Matthew chapter 23 today. In Matthew chapter 23, it is the chapter usually called the woes, as the Lord is dealing with the scribes and the Pharisees. And you're probably familiar with the chapter. It ends actually with Jesus' lament, the Lord's lament over Jerusalem. At the tail end there, as we come down, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. And this is where how I would have gathered you together as a hen gathers her chicks, but you were not willing. But that's how it ends. But you have, in contrast with the Beatitudes in the Sermon on the Mount much earlier, some 3 years later, before going to the cross, you have the woes pronounced upon the Pharisees, the scribes and the Pharisees. And one of the verses within the passage that is familiar is verse 23. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees and hypocrites, for you pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. You might notice just there in that portion that I thought about, that you have, I thought about in my notes putting something along the lines of uh, something about in the kitchen, because you have these figures that are being used that are all somewhat kitchen cooking figures. As far as you have the spices in verse 23, you have the straining out, right? So that idea of straining a liquid, verse 24, and then you have the cleansing of the dishes in verse 25. So you might think about how it's all the figure of in the kitchen, cooking, things along those lines. But verse 23 is what I really wanted to focus on today. And I was just thinking about the idea of you pay tithe, mint, anise, cumin, neglected the weightier matters of law. And I was just thinking about the idea, why would you do that? Why would you be so meticulous in your tithing and yet neglect these more foundational matters? Why would you do that? Why would you be so seemingly godless that it's like a whitewashed tomb full of uncleanness, and yet pay tithe right down to the spices, even on the spices in the cabinets? Why not just be altogether godless? Why not just not pay tithes? And I was just thinking about that idea, and certainly they thought they were religious, and they were deceiving themselves, and a lot of different things like that. But to look back at the account, and you might just consider, why would you do one, but why would you do these things but not the weightier matters of the law? And I guess I'll put my big mug back up there. I wonder if one reason is because it's easy. And what I mean by it's easy, and you wouldn't think that it's easy to pay tithe on the spices in the cabinet, because you have that figure of, of basically, oh, dealing with the spices, and you have, okay, 10 little specks and take one out, 10 little specks, take one out. And it seems very time consuming, certainly, but at the same time, it's very easy because it's concrete. And it's just, okay, you count 10, you take one out. You count 10, you take one out. You count 10, you take one out. It's easy. It's as easy as writing a check. And writing a check is easy. It's as easy as just throwing in the collection out of your prosperity. It's just easy. And so why would you do that? Why would you do one but not the other? It's because paying the tithe, that's right. It's easy. They were very meticulous about it, but it's concrete, and concrete is easy. It's just counting and paying your tithe. So I think that's might be something to consider. Another reason, why would you do it? I think another reason is because it's easier. I think it's easy to overlook the other matters. Sometimes a person may be tempted to think, may be tempted to overlook sin in their life because, well, hey, I pay my tithe. It's like, hey, I'm real generous when the collection plate comes around. I mean, I pay tithe right down to the spices in the cabinets. And so is it really that big of a deal if I do this or if I overlook this? I mean, after all, the Lord said a good bit about money. Wherever a man's treasure is, that's where her heart will be also. Well, I pay tithes right down to the spices in the cabinets, so I better be going to heaven because, after all, I'm the most generous giver at church. And I wonder if that's not one of the reasons. They tithed. They tithed right down to the spices in the cabinets. And it's easy. It's concrete. It's just counting, right? It's just numbers. I wonder if another reason, though, that you would do one but not the other is because spices are easier to deal with. And what I mean by that is justice and mercy and faith, but especially justice and mercy. Spices are easier to deal with than people. And sometimes people don't want to deal with people. And you just think about the chapter and just scroll through it, and you just start seeing one of the problems was how the Pharisees, their relationship with others. They bind heavy burdens hard to bear, lay them on men's shoulders, but they don't do a thing to lift them. But at the same time, they do their works to be seen by men. They love to be called. Verse 7. Exalting himself, I thank thee that I am not like other men. You shut up the kingdom of heaven against men. You don't go in. You don't allow those who are entering to go in. You devour widows' houses. You make pretentious, long prayers. Why? To impress others. You travel land and sea to win one proselyte. Others. You say whoever swears by the temple, right? These are rules that you're putting on others. And let's just keep going down. You outwardly seem righteous to men. Inside, you're full of hypocrisy, lawlessness. And frankly, when it comes down to it, they're killers. They're killers because we know what they're going to do with Jesus. They're going to kill Jesus. They're going to stone Stephen. They're going to kill. They're killers, just like those who came before them. Now, so when we come back up to verse 23, my point is, why would you do one and not the other? And I wonder if a part of it is not, it is easier to do that than to deal with other people, than to deal with people. And maybe to deal with your own as well, thinking of faith. It's easier to just tithe on even the spices. It's easier to do that. Spices are easier than people. Writing checks is easier than dealing with people. They had a problem. They needed to get their, and actually it's almost too late. I was about to say they needed to get their house in order. The Lord has already cleansed the temple, I believe. He's getting the house in order. But as far as this goes, the house is going to be left to them desolate. And it's going to be destroyed. And we know what Jesus came to do, to fulfill the law. The first will be taken away to establish the second. That which they were hanging their hat on, it's going to be taken away. Appreciate you. Hope you have a good day. Hope you join us for our next brief look into God's Word.